What's up, everyone? Tony from the Cold Case Project, back again. And today, what I want to run with you over is all content shared in these videos is readily available in any Google search. Now, with that said, I take this content, have it rewritten, and upon rewriting it, put it in these videos to spread the word on the thousands and thousands of cold cases of men and women throughout the United States that are just forgotten, and I give this platform to them so their cases and their stories can be told. Now, in addition to that, if you look down below in the description, you're going to see some brand new t-shirt and coffee cup designs I've actually gotten from a couple of my subscribers who have over the years have been giving me some awesome fan art. So with that said, I'm offering a 20% discount code down below if you check that out, and splitting proceeds with them because they are awesome. Been watching me for quite some time, and I definitely think they deserve to be rewarded for some of the work they do on top of being full-time employees also. So once again, if you have any recommendations or any suggestions, comment down below. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the video. Like, subscribe. I'm out. Peace.
The last time anyone in Cheryl Jaco's family laid eyes on her was June 23rd, 1999. It was just another hot summer day in Oklahoma City, and Cheryl had stopped by her mother's house to borrow some money. Her mom and sister were both home that day, and what they saw gave them pause. Cheryl looked like she'd been through hell. There was a nasty gash on her lower back, and another deep cut sliced across the instep of her right foot. Naturally, her family asked what had happened. Cheryl brushed it off, saying she'd gotten into a fight with her boyfriend and ended up crashing through a glass coffee table. Her mother and sister didn't buy the casual tone. Those injuries weren't the kind you just walk away from. They begged her to go to the hospital and get stitches, but Cheryl flat out refused. Whether it was pride, fear, or something else entirely, she wouldn't say. And just like that, she left. That was the last time they ever saw her. A week passed. Then came July 3rd, the last day anyone ever heard from Cheryl Jaco. Cheryl was living in Stillwell, Oklahoma at the time, about 3 hours from Oklahoma City. Her teenage daughter, from a previous relationship, was staying with relatives in Pennsylvania. Cheryl didn't have a phone of her own, so she relied on a nearby grocery store to make and receive calls. That day, her daughter called the store, hoping to speak with her mom, but she never got through. A few hours later, Cheryl called her mother from a phone number based in Fort Smith, Arkansas. She told her mom that she was planning to return to Oklahoma City to pay back the money she'd borrowed. She never made it. After that call, Cheryl vanished. At first, no one was overly alarmed. Cheryl had always been a bit unpredictable, someone who could go quiet for weeks at a time. But as the months rolled by and no one heard a word, unease started creeping in. It wasn't until January 2000 that her mother got the phone call that truly sparked panic. A family friend had heard a disturbing rumor. Cheryl was dead. The Jaco family started making calls, asking around, searching for anyone who might have seen or heard from her. Nothing. That was when they officially filed a missing persons report. Desperate for answers, Cheryl's family went to the last address they had for her, a rundown trailer off Highway 100 in Stillwell. What they found was unsettling. The trailer looked abandoned, like no one had lived there for quite some time. But Cheryl's dogs were still there, starving, neglected, and clearly not cared for. It was as if Cheryl had vanished in the middle of her life, leaving everything behind without a trace. Even her small, off-white Datsun pickup truck was gone and has never been recovered. Digging into Cheryl's life revealed more troubling details. At the time she went missing, she had been caught up in a rough crowd. Drugs, crime, and violence were common in her circle. Worse still, she was in a deeply abusive relationship with a man known for violent behavior. Those close to her feared that relationship might have had something to do with her disappearance. Despite efforts by law enforcement and her family, no solid leads have ever materialized. Cheryl Jaco remains missing, her case clouded with suspicion and heartbreak. Authorities believe foul play is likely, but without a body or witnesses, they can't move forward. More than 2 decades later, her name still lingers on missing persons lists, and her family is left with nothing but rumors, unanswered questions, and fading hope. What happened to Cheryl Jaco after that call from Fort Smith remains one of Oklahoma's most haunting cold cases. Ailene Conway was many things: devoted wife, loving mother, and a quiet pillar in her community. She and her husband Pat had been married for 33 years. They raised 7 children together, built a life full of memories in Lawton, Oklahoma, and by all appearances were enjoying the fruits of a long, successful marriage. But on the morning of April 29th, 1986, something unimaginable happened. Something that turned a normal day into the beginning of a lifelong nightmare. That morning, 50-year-old Ailene vanished from her home without a word. By mid-morning, her body was found, badly burned, inside a car that had crashed and burst into flames on a remote country road. It seemed, at first glance, like a tragic one-car accident. A heartbreaking but straightforward story. But what investigators would discover, or fail to discover, would launch a decades-long mystery still unsolved to this day. At 10:40 a.m., a local farmer driving near a quiet back road saw something odd, an ominous plume of dark smoke billowing into the sky. It was coming from a small, unremarkable bridge outside of Lawton, Oklahoma, about 15 miles from the Conway home. Alarmed, he called the authorities. By 11 a.m., troopers from the Oklahoma Highway Patrol arrived at the scene, and what they saw was like something out of a nightmare. A car was fully engulfed in flames, wedged into the bridge's metal guardrail. The heat had been so intense that parts of the vehicle had actually melted into the metal. Inside the driver's seat, there was a body, badly charred and nearly unrecognizable. The crash itself didn't seem survivable. To the untrained eye, it looked like a typical high-speed fatal accident. Skid marks showed the car had been traveling at 50 to 60 miles per hour when it hit the barrier. Nothing appeared suspicious, at least at first. A check on the license plate revealed that the car belonged to Pat Conway. The body inside was later confirmed to be Ailene Conway. The initial assumption was that Ailene had been driving alone, lost control, and accidentally crashed. The Highway Patrol officially ruled it a one-car fatality accident. But just hours later, her husband Pat started noticing things that didn't fit. And once he began speaking up, people started to listen. Pat had left the house earlier that day for work. When he returned later that afternoon, shortly after being notified of the crash, he immediately felt something was wrong. The house didn't feel like the scene of someone who had simply walked out the door and driven away. The patio door was left wide open, something Ailene never did. Her purse was sitting by an armchair, with her driver's license and glasses still inside it. Ailene never left home without her purse, and she certainly wouldn't have driven without her glasses. The iron was still on, positioned on ironing board in the middle of a chore. The garden hose was running into the backyard swimming pool, flooding water unattended. Even stranger, the bathtub was full of water, and the phone was off the hook and left inside the tub. That final detail stuck with Pat. It felt deliberate. Had Ailene try to make a phone call, possibly to 911, only to be stopped? Pat Conway couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened to his wife. This wasn't a routine morning gone wrong. Ailene was a creature of habit, and nothing about that day made sense. He took his concerns to Ray Anderson, an investigator working for the local district attorney's office. At first, Anderson assumed Pat was simply a grieving husband trying to make sense of an accident. But as he began to look into the circumstances, Anderson agreed too many things didn't add up. He began retracing Ailene's final steps. A few days after the crash, Pat and Anderson revisited the bridge where Ailene died. They scoured the roadside, looking for anything that had been missed. That's when they found something peculiar, a church bulletin lying in the grass 200 feet away from the bridge. Pat recognized it instantly. It was the bulletin from their church. He remembered seeing it on the dashboard of Aileen's car just a day or two earlier. But there was something about its location that disturbed him. Ailene always drove with the windows rolled up and the air conditioning running. There was no way that bulletin could have just blown out the window during the crash. The car must have been stopped, the door opened, and someone must have removed it, meaning someone else had likely been in that vehicle. Anderson began to theorize that Ailene had not been alone that morning. Someone may have taken her to that bridge, placed her in the driver's seat, either unconscious or already dead, and set the car in motion toward the guardrail, hoping the fire would destroy all the evidence. Investigators brought in Sonny Sansom from the state fire marshal's office to examine the crash scene and the vehicle. Right away, Sansom noticed the level of damage was unusual. The entire interior of the car was completely destroyed by flames. Even for a crash, it was excessive. He also noted that the gas cap was missing, a detail that often points to intentional arson. Removing the gas cap allows gasoline fumes to escape more rapidly and feed a fire. To test his suspicions, Sansom performed informal burn tests using identical upholstery and dashboard material from a car of the same make and model. When the material was burned without any accelerant, it extinguished quickly. But when gasoline was added, the fire mirrored the one in Aileen's car, turning the interior into a complete inferno. He concluded that it was highly likely an accelerant was used to create the fire. In other words, someone may have deliberately set the car ablaze. If Ailene Conway was murdered, the next question was obvious. Why? And by whom? Theory 1. A burglary gone wrong in the weeks prior to Aileen's death. The Conway neighborhood had seen a string of burglaries. Pat believed it was very possible that intruders targeted their home, thinking no one was there. When they encountered Ailene, they panicked and removed her from the house by force. They may have driven her out in her own vehicle to avoid being seen, then staged the crash as a way to silence her forever. Some jewelry was missing from the home, a possible clue, but nothing had been definitively proven. No forced entry was ever confirmed, and the theory, while chilling, remained speculative. Theory 2. Lured or deceived the phone off the hook raised another possibility. Perhaps Ailene had received a disturbing or deceptive phone call that caused her to leave the house in a rush. Could someone have called, pretending to be in trouble, or delivered a fake emergency involving a family member to lure her out? Again, there was no public record of whether phone logs were ever pulled or reviewed, and it remained unclear why she would have driven 15 miles away, alone, rather than going to a neighbor or calling for help. Theory 3. A mental or medical breakdown. Some speculated that Ailene may have experienced a sudden medical emergency, a stroke, or a mental health episode that caused her to behave erratically, leaving the house in a confused state and ultimately crashing her car. But friends and family rejected this idea. Ailene had no known history of mental illness, and even if she had been disoriented, it did not explain the gas cap, the level of fire damage, or the placement of the church bulletin. Despite mounting questions, suspicions, and strange evidence, no arrests were made. No concrete leads emerged, and with the vehicle and body destroyed by fire, little physical evidence could be recovered. Eventually, the case was reclassified from accidental to undetermined, but remained unsolved. Investigators like Ray Anderson and arson experts like Sonny Sansom believe Ailene was murdered. They believe the crash was staged, and that her killer was never far away. For Pat Conway, the pain has never faded. Decades later, he still wonders what really happened that morning. Who came into their home? Who made that call, if anyone? Why was his wife on that road, in that place at that time? And most hauntingly, could someone have stopped it? He remains convinced that someone knows something. Maybe they've stayed silent out of fear. Maybe they believe it's too late to come forward. But Pat insists it's not. He says he will never stop searching. Never stop asking. Never stop trying to bring justice for Ailene. In the end, the death of Ailene Conway remains one of Oklahoma's most disturbing cold cases. The evidence points toward a carefully disguised crime. A woman possibly abducted from her home, silenced in a remote place, and hidden behind the veil of an accident. But despite the fire and the years that have passed, the memory of Ailene and the trail of unanswered questions she left behind still burns in the minds of those who knew her. This wasn't just an accident. It wasn't just bad luck. And someone out there knows the truth. "17-year-old Molly Miller was full of life. She was funny, a little rebellious, fiercely loyal to her family, and always down for a good time. Growing up in the quiet town of Wilson, Oklahoma, she was known for her big smile, quick wit, and athleticism. She played softball, had dreams of studying nursing, and like most teenagers, she wanted freedom. She wanted to be taken seriously. In the early summer of 2013, Molly had started pulling away from her family, especially her parents. She began hanging out with an older crowd that had a reputation around town, not the kind of kids who played softball and made good grades, but the kind that threw wild parties, had rap sheets, and were always skating the edge of trouble. That crowd included 21-year-old Colt Haynes. Colt was a lanky guy with an easy smile and a soft voice. He wasn't some hardened criminal, more like a young man caught between wanting to be better and not knowing how. He had a child of his own. Some saw him as a lost cause. Others saw someone who was just making bad choices. Colt had grown up in the same area and, like Molly, was circling the edges of Wilson's more troubled scene. Also in that group was James Con Nip. People just called him Con. Con was different. He had a certain confidence, maybe arrogance, that came from knowing he had powerful connections. His cousin, after all, was none other than the Love County Sheriff, Joe Russell. That would prove to matter far more than anyone expected. July 7th, 2013. It was a hot summer night in Wilson, and Molly, Colt, and Con were hanging out, possibly at a party or just kicking back at someone's house. Accounts vary, but at some point late that night, after 10 p.m., the trio left in a car driven by Con, a silver 2012 Honda Accord that belonged to his girlfriend, Sabrina Fincher Graham. They were headed toward a convenience store, but Con, being Con, couldn't resist pulling a stunt. Just outside of town, near the store, he decided to spin his tires and throw gravel, right in front of a police cruiser. Big mistake. The officer gave chase, and what followed was a high-speed pursuit through the back roads of rural Oklahoma. Con hit speeds of up to 120 miles per hour with the headlights off. They tore through Love County, a stretch of tangled woods and dirt roads. It was dangerous, reckless, and illegal, and it should have ended in handcuffs. But it didn't, because as the pursuit entered Love County, the police called off the chase. And that's not the strangest part. The decision to halt the chase came from Love County Sheriff Joe Russell, Con's cousin. He later said he didn't want to tear up his cruisers, and that he knew where the car was going. Why would a sheriff say that? And how could he be so confident? By the time the chase ended, Con had driven the car deep into a field off Long Hollow Road, an area surrounded by woods and owned, allegedly, by Con's family. What happened next is murky at best, terrifying at worst. Just after midnight, at 12:47 a.m. on July 8th, 2013, Molly Miller called 911 from her cell phone. But she didn't say a word. The call either dropped or she hung up. Dispatch tried to call her back. No answer. No one was sent to check. Then Colt started calling people. He reached out to friends, some of whom answered and heard him frantically asking for help. He said he was injured, that he'd broken his ankle and was lying in a creek or ditch somewhere near Long Hollow Road. One person said Colt told them the bone was sticking out. He couldn't walk. He couldn't find Molly. At the same time, Molly was also calling people, relatives, and friends. She said she was in a field. She didn't know exactly where she was, but she was scared and needed a ride. One friend said he got the call at 6 a.m., but was on his way to work and couldn't come. Those were the last confirmed contacts anyone had with Molly and Colt. Con somehow made it home. He told authorities that Molly and Colt had run off into the woods, and he went the other way. He said he never saw them again. That explanation never sat right with anyone, especially not Molly's family. They tried to file a missing persons report, but Sheriff Joe Russell wasn't having it. He insisted that Molly wasn't missing, just out with friends. When they pressed harder, he told them, bizarrely, "I know where she is." But that wasn't true. Joe Russell had no idea where Molly was. And if he did, he sure wasn't helping to find her. As the days turned into weeks, the Love County Sheriff's Department showed little urgency. Family and friends began organizing their own searches. They scoured fields, creeks, back roads. Then, on July 22nd, 2 weeks after Molly and Colt vanished, the Honda Accord was found, wrecked, and abandoned near Long Hollow Road, on land connected to Con's family. There were no signs of Molly or Colt. No blood, no clothing, no cell phones, nothing. Soon, disturbing rumors began to swirl around Love County. Allegations of drug trafficking, illegal favors, and cover-ups began to surface. The sheriff, Joe Russell, was suspected of corruption. People believed he was using his power to protect Con and possibly others connected to a wider criminal ring operating in the area. Despite public outcry and mounting suspicion, very little progress was made in the case. Con Nip refused to cooperate. So did his girlfriend, Sabrina. They clammed up, and without hard evidence or confession, police had little to go on. In January 2014, 6 months after Molly and Colt vanished, Con was finally arrested and charged with felony endangerment for the police chase. He was sentenced to 10 years, but it had nothing to do with the disappearances. He remained silent about that. Years passed. Molly and Colt's families kept searching. Private investigators were hired. Media attention grew. The podcast Up and Vanished aired an episode about the case. Investigative journalist Phil Klein even got involved and claimed to have leads about possible burial sites. But still no bodies, no arrests, no closure. Cell phone data from that night suggested that both Molly and Colt's phones had pinged in the Long Hollow area for hours. Then they went dark. Some believe they were left in the woods to die. Others think foul play happened much earlier, possibly at or near the crash site, and their bodies were moved. But almost everyone agrees on one thing. Con knows more than he's saying. The case of Molly Miller and Colt Haynes reveals something more sinister than just 2 missing people. It exposes a deep rot in the justice system of Love County, Oklahoma. A sheriff with family ties to suspects. An uninvestigated 911 call. Delayed charges. A wrecked car sitting on family land. And not a single person held accountable for 2 lives that vanished into the night. Today, Molly Miller would be 28 years old. Colt Haynes would be in his 30s. Their families still live with the ache of not knowing what happened. They have birthdays without them, holidays without them. There are no gravestones, no answers, only questions. Who let Con walk away from that wreck without questioning him? Why wasn't Molly's 911 call taken seriously? How can 2 people vanish after calling for help and be forgotten by the very system that's supposed to protect them? If anyone has information about the disappearance of Molly Miller and Colt Haynes, they are urged to contact the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation or local law enforcement. Because somewhere out there, someone knows. And it's long past time for the truth to come out. A country nurse vanishes. A stormy morning. A truck left at a bar. And one man in the family says they'd bet the farm on. Growing up in the rolling farmlands of Eufaula, Oklahoma, Peggy Maguire had the kind of life that sounded simple on paper: small-town living, a close-knit family, a love for fishing, camping, and country roads. But under that serene surface, Peggy's life was anything but simple. Her story is not just about a woman who went missing. It's about a mother's love, a long history of domestic abuse, and the haunting feeling that justice might have been buried right alongside the truth. Peggy Maguire was last seen on the morning of Monday, November 16th, 2015. It was just another routine day. She had just wrapped up a double shift at Wellington Hills Nursing Center, where she worked as a licensed practical nurse. She was proud of that job, proud to wear those scrubs after working her butt off to get her nursing degree and pass the boards. That morning, she picked up her 8-year-old son Ethan, drove him to school in her Toyota Tundra, dropped him off with a hug, and drove away. That was the last time anyone ever saw Peggy. She was 28 years old, full of hope, with a job she loved and a plan to finally move on from the broken relationship that had shackled her for over a decade. Peggy was supposed to be spending that Tuesday with someone new, a man she'd been dating, a breath of fresh air named Richard, who was supposed to be coming in from Texas. She told friends she was taking the day off work to meet him. She'd been excited, hopeful even, about this new chapter. But Tuesday came, and Richard never saw her. He never heard from her either, and neither did anyone else. Her phone? Dead. Her credit cards? Untouched. Social security number? Unused. It was like she vanished into thin air. But Peggy's family, they knew better. They didn't believe she ran away. Not for a second. Because there was one person they had suspected all along. At 5:20 a.m. the next morning, just before dawn and in the middle of a violent thunderstorm, surveillance video captured Peggy's 2012 Toyota Tundra pulling into the parking lot of Tanjay's Ice House, a rural roadside bar off Highway 9, roughly 10 miles from her home. It's the kind of place you wouldn't expect to find Peggy, not just because it was remote, but because she didn't drink and never went there. The truck stops. The headlights shut off. The driver's side door opens. A man, still unidentified by law enforcement to this day, steps out, pockets his hands, and walks off into the rainy Oklahoma darkness. That truck? It would sit there, abandoned, until Peggy's family found it with their own eyes, not the police. Her brother spotted it in the parking lot, and they got a hold of the surveillance tape themselves. And when they watched that figure walking away from her truck, hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched against the rain, her cousin and best friend, Elizabeth Leeper, says there was no doubt in her mind. That was Thomas. That was the father of her child. I'd bet the farm on it. Thomas McIntosh wasn't just Peggy's ex, he was Ethan's father. Her high school sweetheart. The man she fell for when they were still kids, when she didn't know any better. And according to nearly everyone in Peggy's life, he was the man who controlled, beat, and emotionally battered her for years. He wasn't just possessive, Elizabeth said. He was dangerous. There were stories, too many to count. The time in high school when he allegedly pistol-whipped her in the face during lunch. The times he smashed her car windows out of jealousy. The arguments that ended in bruises. The protective orders she got against him. The battery charges she filed. All real. All documented. And yet, she always went back. Why? For Ethan. Peggy wanted her son to have a normal life. A family. A home. Even if it meant putting herself second. Eventually, Peggy followed McIntosh to Indiana for a job he got. But that only made things worse. Elizabeth recalls the final straw. He strangled her. In front of her kid. When she came back to Oklahoma, she was broken. She was scared, but she was finally done. She dropped the charges, yes. She moved back in with him, yes. But by the fall of 2015, Peggy was in control. The relationship was platonic. She was dating again. She had plans to move out, once and for all. She told friends she was going to her mother's apartment that weekend. She had a plan, and she was almost free. That Tuesday, after the surveillance footage captured Peggy's truck being abandoned, Thomas McIntosh showed up at the bar, supposedly looking for her. He told police Peggy had run off with another man, that she just left. But what raised eyebrows was what he allegedly told his son even before the truck had been found. Ethan told a relative that his father had already shown him where Mama left her truck and said she had run off. That was before the truck was officially found, before the surveillance footage surfaced. It was too neat, too fast. And what child would make that up? When police searched the property Peggy and McIntosh still shared, the home they lived in with Ethan, they found blood on the couch outside on the back porch. They found red stains on a leather glove in Thomas's truck. And they found red stains in the bucket of a front-loading tractor. Yes, a tractor. One neighbor told investigators they saw Thomas driving the tractor around with the bucket raised high in the air on the day Peggy vanished. That might not mean much to outsiders, but to country folks, it did. Tractor buckets aren't typically driven like that. The implication was chilling. Was Peggy in that bucket? For nearly 2 weeks after she vanished, the local sheriff's office did next to nothing, according to her family. There were no search warrants, no formal searches, no suspects, and definitely no arrests. McIntosh's last name carried weight in McIntosh County. His family was well known, connected, and for a while, it felt like no one wanted to touch him, not even with gloves on. It wasn't until 2 full weeks after Peggy went missing that the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation got involved. Special Agent Jenny Verdin was assigned the case, and almost immediately considered it a likely homicide. This wasn't a woman who just left her life, Verdon said. All signs point to foul play. Phone records showed both Peggy and Thomas's phones pinged from the same area, their house, the morning she disappeared. Her last call was around 10 a.m., after dropping Ethan off, when she told her new boyfriend she was making beef jerky. After that, silence. Her phone was never turned back on. Despite circumstantial evidence piling up, Thomas McIntosh has never been arrested, never been charged, and to this day, remains publicly unnamed by law enforcement as a suspect. Today, Peggy's mother, Betty Davis, has not seen her grandson since the day her daughter vanished. She's filed legal motions for visitation, arguing that the boy may be at risk physically or emotionally under McIntosh's care. She believes Peggy is dead. So does everyone who loved her. She didn't walk away. She didn't vanish into the night. Someone made her disappear. Peggy left behind pets, dogs, goats, 150 head of cattle, and the one person she never would have abandoned, Ethan. She was a nurse, a daughter, a mother, a friend, and now she's a name on a missing persons database, a face on a poster, a memory. If you know something, say something. Someone knows what happened to Peggy Maguire. Someone saw something. And if you think you know who did this, you're not alone. Her friends and family say they know, and they'd bet the farm on it. On the morning of December 4th, 2009, Ralph Healey went about his day like it was any other. The 57-year-old self-employed trucker was well known around El Reno, Oklahoma, a man of habit, someone who hauled cattle up and down the routes stretching into Kansas and Texas. He kept his cattle trailer parked at a truck stop just west of town, while his tractor stayed at his quiet rural property, a double-wide trailer along the 14300 block of West State Highway 66. That day, Ralph started things off with breakfast at a local El Reno diner. After that, he filled up the tank of his personal pickup truck, then stopped at the bank in nearby Union City. Around 11:20 a.m., he called a friend and mentioned he had plans to wash his tractor-trailer rig later that day. It was a normal conversation. Nothing sounded off, but that would be the last time anyone heard Ralph Healey's voice. When Ralph failed to show up for a scheduled trucking run, people started to worry. It wasn't like him to skip a job without a call. His friends and family contacted authorities, and soon after, a welfare check was done at his rural home. That's where the real concern began. His pickup truck was parked out front, along with his tractor, both untouched. Even more troubling, Ralph's old dachshund, the one he took everywhere with him on the road, was still inside the trailer. The dog was alive, but just barely weak, dehydrated, and clearly neglected since Ralph vanished. The poor animal died just 9 days later. That detail alone broke hearts. Everyone who knew Ralph knew how much he adored that little dog. He wouldn't have left it behind unless something was terribly wrong. Despite a search, no sign of Ralph ever turned up. In the months following his disappearance, both his pickup truck and his tractor-trailer rig were repossessed. But there was no physical evidence, no note, no signs of foul play, just a man who disappeared into thin air, leaving behind a dying dog and an eerie silence. As investigators dug deeper, rumors began swirling about Ralph's gambling habits. He was a frequent visitor to the Lucky Star Casino, and not just for fun, he was known to win big. In the summer before his disappearance, Ralph hit it big twice, once winning $20,000 in a single night, and another time walking away with $10,000. Some people claimed he'd won even more, possibly over $90,000 shortly before he vanished. Whether or not that was true remains unconfirmed, but Ralph wasn't shy about talking up his luck. He liked to brag about his wins, and that may have made him a target. Naturally, this led to speculation. Did someone decide to follow Ralph home one night, hoping to rob him? Could he have been ambushed by someone who knew his habits and assumed he had cash on hand? There was no record of him visiting the casino the day before he disappeared, but that didn't rule anything out. Money, after all, can bring out the worst in people. Outside of trucking and the occasional casino trip, Ralph enjoyed simpler pastimes. He was a hunter, a fisherman, and a man who liked the quiet rhythm of rural life. It's hard to imagine someone like that just walking away from everything without a trace, especially from a beloved pet he never went anywhere without. Now, more than a decade later, Ralph Healey's case is still open, still unsolved. No signs of foul play, no confirmed sightings, no body. Just unanswered questions, and a sense that something dark and unexpected happened on that ordinary December day.